All right, I think we're ready to get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Marguerite Easterbrook. I'm the president of the West Village Chorale, and I'd like to welcome you to the 8th and final installment of our 49th annual Summer Sing series. The West Village Chorale is delighted to offer these weekly summer sings free of charge, though we are grateful for any donations you can give to help cover our costs. Before we begin, I have a few quick technical notes for this week. The chat function will still be disabled, so if you have a specific question for tech or for our conductor, please utilize the Q&A feature at the bottom of the webinar screen. Additionally, the scores will be shared on the screen, but we still recommend that you open the PDF of the public domain scores. The link for that is available on our website at westvillagechorale.org on our Summer Sings page. I also have a quick West Village Chorale announcement about our upcoming season. The fall of 2020 will be practically all virtual, and to kick it off, on September 12th, we will host our first event, a virtual choral boot camp. We will have presentations on vocal health and singing, in addition to presentations about a virtual choir setup and some tips and tricks of the trade. We hope you'll be able to join us for our virtual choral boot camp. And that date again is Saturday, September 12th. We'll be sure to send out emails when registration opens. All right, now on to tonight's program. We are thrilled to have Michael Conley lead us in tonight's sing, titled A Song of Peace. Michael is the director of music ministries at Calvary Presbyterian Church in San Francisco, and the former artistic director of the West Village Chorale. We're so excited to have Michael here with us from the West Coast. Maestro, it's good to see you, and thank you for being here today. Please take it away.
Thanks, Marguerite. Well, hello, everyone. I think this might be how they faked the moon landing. It's kind of what it feels like. I'm like some guy in a tech room just imagining that things are going on. It's very strange not to be able to see you all, but I know you're there, and there are lots of old friends out there watching and listening right now and singing along, and that warms my heart. It's just wonderful to be with you all. Without further ado, I guess we'll kind of dive into things. I will just give you all a little note of apology ahead of time that, we're having all these fires out here and the air is very smoky. We haven't been able to open our windows for the last like 5 or 6 days. And I'm just having a terrible kind of raspy vocal attack. I have had headaches the last few days from the smoke and the bad air. So I'm not in the best vocal health at the moment, so I'm probably not going to really do a warm-up with you all. We'll do a little physical warm-up just to get ourselves relaxed, but not much vocally because I can't really lead it. I also might just talk a little less than I would have. So I'm sure that'll make Ed Shiner happy and maybe the rest of you too. So less talking, more getting to the music. So I am gonna share my screen in a moment, but before I do that, why don't we just do a little physical warm up to get ourselves relaxed and ready to do some singing. So just start by closing your eyes and just kind of feel your spine, what position it's in. Try to let it expand a little bit. Feel like you are lightening and lifting upwards. Feel those vertebrae separating and expanding, unclenching, untightening. Try not to be hunched. I'm sure most of us are sitting at a desk somewhere. So try to find a position that enables you to sit tall and relaxed and comfortable. Good. Now let your neck relax. Lean forward with your neck and backwards. And over to each side, way down to your shoulder. If you want to pull down on your head a little, sometimes that feels good. The other way. And while you're doing that, make sure the other shoulder goes down. Yeah. Good. Excellent. Now just roll your shoulders a little bit. And the other one, oh, I needed that. And a big roll in both directions and your shoulders up. And release. Good. Arms over your head. Just stretch out. Look up at the ceiling. And relax. Good. And let's just massage our faces a little bit. Release some of that tension. And hum. Mm, mm, mm. Ooh, good. And everybody breathe out and breathe in, and a long vocal sigh. Ooh. Good. All right, I hope everyone feels a little more relaxed now, and I am going to start sharing my screen. And here we go. So, when I was thinking about this sing, the thing that popped into my head is that we all need a little more peace in our lives these days. The world is so chaotic, and there's so many stressful things going on that I thought doing an evening focusing on the theme of peace might be just the thing. So here we are, focusing on the idea of peace, and specifically through the lens of the Dona Nobis Pacem text. Let's skip ahead here a little. I wanted to start, before we dive in, with this little prayer, a tiny prayer, and it's from Micah Busey, who is the Reverend, an associate pastor at Judson Memorial Church, where I used to be the music director. He's a former colleague of mine. I know many of you know Micah. And throughout the pandemic, he has been writing a daily tiny prayer. Just things that are on his mind that he thinks might help people as we deal with this stressful time in the world. And the one he wrote yesterday really spoke to me, and it happened to be a little bit on the theme of peace. So I just thought we might start with it. You should be able to see it on your screen. May you listen to that subtle yearning within you, the voice you often impatiently brush off, and realize that this voice is calling you to seek a slightly different course today. Not anything major, not anything earth-shaking, but a simple shift in your timeline. And whether you are overscheduled and needing to postpone one stressful plan, or underscheduled and needing to reach out to make one loving connection, may you do just one thing that brings you comfort and quiet, for no other reason than the truth that the still small voice within you is asking for it. Amen. Thank you, Micah, for that. And let's hope that this is a loving connection for all of us today, engaging with each other through music. So we're going to be going through the lens mostly of the Agnus Dei text today. I'm sure most of you know about this text, and I don't need to tell you a whole lot. It's from the ordinary of the Mass. The ordinary are just the elements of the Mass that are celebrated at every celebration of the Mass, as opposed to the proper, which are not more formal things. They're just things that are specific to a day of the week, or a certain feast day, a certain particular celebration in the liturgical calendar. But the ordinary of the Mass are the things that you speak or sing or both in every celebration of the Mass. And the Agnus Dei comes towards the end, at the end of the consecration of the Eucharist. And as you can see, it means Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world, have mercy on us. You repeat that 3 times, but the 3rd time, we change that last line of text to grant us peace, which I always think is so beautiful. There's something so wonderful about the symmetry of ritual, the fact that we do things 3 times, in this case in honor of the Trinity. But that little subtle change at the end to grant us peace is always a beautiful moment to me in that ritual. And that's what we're focusing on today. doesn't have to be a religious thing for any of us. It's more the idea that when we look for ways to take strife out of our lives and out of the world, we are creating peace. So let's create a little peace by doing music today. Our first piece, the first setting we're going to do of this wonderful text, the Agnus Dei, concluding with Dona Nobis Pacem, is from Byrd. William Byrd, one of the great English composers, lived during the Tudor era and did most of his writing during the reign of Elizabeth. And you know, he was raised Anglican and he did write some Anglican music, but he became increasingly interested in the Roman Church as he got older. And it's not explicit, we're not totally sure if he did a formal conversion to the Roman Catholic Church, but he likely did. And most of his music is Roman Catholic in orientation as he gets further into his life and career. And most of his most admired and really great music was probably written with the Catholic liturgy in mind. So the three masses he wrote within about 3 years of each other. It's not entirely sure exactly when they were written. We don't have dates. They weren't published. The way they were published was in folios, so you just had one part. And that was partly to protect the composer and the people who were performing it. There's no composer listed on it. They were just a voice part. And that's partly to protect them because they weren't supposed to be writing music for the Catholic liturgy. It was illegal. So he wrote these three masses for 3 voices, 4 voices, and 5 voices. And they're all just masterpieces of this particular genre of choral music. But I particularly love the Mass for 4 voices, and particularly this beautiful Agnus Dei. So let's get into it. Unfortunately, it just kind of starts with no preparation. So altos, be ready, and we will dive right in. Here we go. I don't know about you, but that makes me feel a lot more peaceful. Those final crunchy suspensions on those last Dona Nobises are just so beautiful. Love that piece. So next we are going to move on to some Bach. This piece doesn't need a lot of introduction for most of you, probably. Bach, as you know, was basically the centerpiece of the Baroque. His lifespan is kind of what we call the Baroque era, about 1685 to 1750, roughly. Kind of the same lifespan as Handel. So the two of them and Vivaldi, they all lived within just a few years of each other and are kind of the three cornerstones of the Baroque. Bach wrote every genre of music except opera, although in some ways we can sort of consider his passions to be his version of opera, since they are so character driven and they kind of come across like liturgical church opera. But he pushed the boundaries of musical form and expression in every genre he wrote. He just sort of blasted everything wide open. And if it had been written, he wrote it better. And it's kind of still true. We can go backwards and say nobody has done anything better than Bach. He's just so extraordinary. The B minor Mass was completed the year before he died. It's largely based on other pieces that he had already written, cantatas and motets and shorter pieces, mostly cantatas that he's rewritten. As you know, this was very common in the Baroque. Handel, almost everything he wrote, he had already written it before. And this is true of Bach, and it's true in the Mass, although like everything else, Bach takes this to sort of the nth degree, because he doesn't just sort of casually rewrite something, he completely reimagines it. He brings in new counterpoint, new orchestrations, just transforms the previous material. It's not really clear whether he ever thought of the B minor Mass as a piece that was going to be performed. There was kind of no framework with which to imagine performing it in his time. It certainly could not have been done in church. He changed some of the text. It's not liturgically correct, a lot of it. The way it's divided up in movements makes it almost impossible to perform in a liturgical setting. So it's not really clear whether he thought of this as a piece that was going to be performed or as kind of a capstone of his career, a compendium of all of the composition techniques he had been learning and inventing and perfecting and reinventing his whole career, because this piece sort of puts it all together into one monumental opus. So we don't know whether he imagined it would be performed, but the fact is it was not performed in its entirety until 1859. The Dona Nobis Pacem at the very end is exactly the same musically as the Gratias Agimus from the Gloria, a previous movement. And they're both based on an early cantata, BWV 29. So I think one of the great moments in all of music is when the trumpets come in this movement. So enjoy that glorious moment. And let's do Bach's Dona Nobis together. Here we go. Once again, we start without help. So just come in as best you can. Sorry, we'll just rewind that. Here we go. I'm just checking the Q&A here. Oh, we have some comments that the sound is not good.
Michael, what you may want to try to do is stop sharing your screen, make sure that the computer audio is on.
Make sure that the what?
Share computer audio is on.
Where do I do that? Hold on.
So you'll want to stop.
Share computer sound.
Yes, that one.
Okay, we'll see if it's any better. Let me skip ahead and try starting the next video and tell me if the sound is better.
Yes, it's better.
It's better? Okay, good. Excellent. Sorry about that, everyone. All right, so let me put the chat away and we will back up here. All right. I was just going to share a personal note about the Bach. Every time I do it, I get emotional thinking about two important mentors in my life, who many of you knew, especially one of them. My second year at Westminster for grad school, Dr. Flummerfeld, our teacher, took a sabbatical for one semester, and we were scheduled to learn the B minor Mass to do with the New Jersey Symphony in the second half of the year. So we took the entire first half of the year to just rehearse and take a deep dive into studying and learning about the B minor Mass through our accompanist, Nancy Amperella. And she led our rehearsals for the first half of that whole year. And it was just such an extraordinary experience to have her as a teacher for 3 rehearsals a week, 6 hours, however much time that was a week. She was such a generous soul and so smart, and she brought in lots of interesting experts to talk about different aspects of Bach and the history of this piece. It was an amazing experience, and every time I do it, I just have to think about Joseph Flummerfeld and Nancy Amperella, 2 great humans who I was so lucky to know, and I know a lot of you knew them as well. Moving on to Haydn. The way Bach is kind of the patriarch of the Baroque era, Haydn is the patriarch of the classical period. Classical period of music is kind of defined a little bit by his lifespan. Starts just a few years after he was born, and it ends just a few years after his death. He was a mentor to Mozart and a tutor to Beethoven for a little while, although Beethoven was apparently a very unruly student, but I think they were fond of each other. The majority of his career he spent employed by the Esterházy family, and he lived on their estate. And he had a resident orchestra there and singers, a choir. So most of the music he wrote was for this family. It was for their sort of royal occasions in their chapel, for court functions. And so he had a pretty good gig compared to a lot of people. He had very steady employment, but at the same time, he was dependent on the whims of his employer, and there were a lot of whims. He would sometimes just decide that he didn't want wind players in the orchestra and would dismiss them all, and Haydn would suddenly have to start writing things with no winds, and a lot of other quirky things. And in fact, that's true of this piece. His employer at the time had decided to dismiss the woodwinds from the orchestra. So this Mass, unlike the other 6 late Masses in Haydn's output, doesn't have woodwinds in the original orchestration. He wrote this, and this is his title. We often hear this piece called the Lord Nelson Mass. That is a nickname that was given to it because on the day it was premiered, Napoleon's forces lost in a big battle to Lord Nelson. So it sort of got that nickname, but Haydn's title for it is Mass in Time of Trouble, or Mass in Troubled Times. Um, and it's because Napoleon's troops were invading Egypt, and they had won 4 major battles against Austria in the year prior. They had been massed outside of Vienna. They never quite invaded, but they kept threatening to. So it was indeed a troubled time. And I think you can hear a lot of that angst in this mass. There are a lot of march-like rhythms, sort of angry outbursts from the trumpets and drums that sound very warlike. So by the time we get through all that Sturm und Drang and we get to this beautiful Dona Nobis Agnus Dei at the end, it's kind of a song of triumph in this case. It's like he's decided that peace is going to come, and this is the music that's going to escort it on its way in. So we're going to listen to the soloist do the Agnus Dei and lead us into the Dona Nobis, which is partly through. So here we go. another quick little story about Westminster. At the end of my first year of grad school, I had not been in the Westminster Choir because my graduate assistantship was being the assistant conductor to another choir called the Westminster Singers. But Dr. Flimmerville asked a couple extra people to go to the Spoleto Festival every year because they needed more singers for the opera chorus. And I had just auditioned for the Westminster Choir and gotten in for my next year. So I hadn't actually heard the Westminster Choir until we went to the Spoleto Festival, and their first performance, which those of us who were just doing opera chorus stuff weren't in, was this mass, the Mass in Time of Trouble. And I went to a rehearsal and was listening to them. And by the end of like 2 measures of the first time I heard them singing this glorious piece, I was literally in tears. I was just crying because it was so beautiful. It was the most beautiful choral sound I'd ever heard live at that point in my life. And it's just a moment I'll never forget. I'm sure you all have some moment like that, that you will always remember in your choral singing life. But that was a very special one for me. So I always think of that when I do this wonderful piece of Haydn. We know Ed Shiner hates Haydn, but I think that's a really great piece, and even he can't argue. Moving on to a little Mendelssohn. I think Mendelssohn is just such a great composer, and he's sometimes a little underrated. I think he kind of gets lost in there between Beethoven and Brahms. And we don't always give him the attention he deserves, but it's particularly for us choral people, he's especially important because he was the most prolific choral composer of this era. Both he and his sister Fanny were great musicians. Fanny would probably be a lot more famous if she hadn't been a woman in the time when she was a woman. Who knows, that might even be true today, sadly, as we all know. We still have a long way to go when it comes to equality, but Fanny was a very gifted musician and composer as well. I think Mendelssohn was arguably the greatest child prodigy that we've ever had as a musician. And that surprises people sometimes when you say that, because everyone thinks of Mozart. Mozart was maybe the most famous child prodigy because of the way he was trotted around Europe by his father to perform for all the courts and patrons, but Mendelssohn was a just astonishingly gifted child prodigy, and the music that he wrote as a teenager is really extraordinary, mature, beautiful music. All the string symphonies that he wrote when he was an early teenager. Mozart may have been a more gifted performer as a child prodigy, but I think Mendelssohn may have been the most gifted composer as a child prodigy. In fact, he was only 16 when he wrote 2 of his most admired pieces, the String Octet and the Overture to A Midsummer Night's Dream, which, by the way, was the first real concert overture ever written, the first piece that was written to a play, to a theme, like program music, but that was not written for an actual production in the theater. So he kind of started a new genre with that Overture to A Midsummer Night's Dream. Such an incredible piece. He also was responsible in large part for reviving the music of Bach. He started conducting concerts of Bach when he discovered that music as a young composer. And he wrote the first oratorio, Paulus. So Mendelssohn did a lot of firsts, and he did a lot of extraordinary things. This little piece, I think, is not nearly as famous as it should be, Verleih uns Frieden. I mean, it's not like it's undiscovered, people do it, but I feel like it's one of the finest little gems from the Romantic era. It's just such a gorgeous piece, written in 1831. And in fact, Robert Schumann said this about this piece: "This small piece deserves to be world famous and will become so in the future. The Madonnas of Raphael and Murillo cannot remain hidden for long." I love that little quote. So yeah, this is just a little 1 movement cantata. He actually called it a cantata, but it doesn't have any movements. It's just this piece, this little song, a piece to a text by Martin Luther. So I apologize. This is the one piece I could not get a decent sized score to go with it. So if you downloaded the PDFs of the music, you might want to get that out for this one, Verleih uns Frieden of Mendelssohn, because you won't be able to read the score on the screen. So here we go. So beautiful. Just making sure there aren't any more questions. Okay, very good. All right, moving on. I ran out of time to do a couple intro screens, so I'll just talk for a second. Our next piece is by the American composer from this same era, just a little bit later than Mendelssohn, John Knowles Paine. He was kind of the first, how shall we say, internationally acknowledged or even in some way celebrated American composer of Western classical music. He went to Germany to study as a young man. He's from Maine, Portland, Maine, and he went to Germany to study. And while he was in Germany, he got the idea to write a setting of the Mass. Now, he was a New England Protestant, and this whole genre was probably very unfamiliar to him, but he was a quick study, and it's obvious that he studied a lot of Beethoven, because large swaths of this Mass are clearly very Beethoven-esque and influenced by Beethoven's style of choral and orchestral writing. But it's the first large-scale choral and orchestral work by an American composer. After he came back from his studies in Germany, he finished it. This was during the Civil War that he was writing it. He finished it in 1866. He went back to Germany and it had its premiere in Berlin, I believe, in 1867, and it was well received. Then he came back to America, and the Mass had one performance in Boston, where he was just starting to work at Harvard at the time. And then it was never performed again by anyone until Gunther Schuller, a famous American conductor from the mid-century, the previous century, discovered it and decided to perform it for the bicentennial of America in 1976 at a music festival in New England. And he made a recording with the St. Louis Symphony of that performance. And I happened to stumble on a record of that recording by the St. Louis Symphony and Gunther Schuller of the complete Mass while I was in college. I was really interested in American music, particularly American music of the 19th century, because it didn't get a lot of attention. So I brought that Mass home and I just devoured it. I was so blown away. It was such a great piece. I couldn't believe no one had ever heard of it. Well, except Gunther Schuller, obviously, and the St. Louis Symphony. But it's sort of been a crusade of mine to keep this Mass alive. I did most of it with the West Village Chorale a few years ago. And we did the entire piece with the Hudson Chorale. Some of you are here with us tonight up in Westchester back in 2012, I think. And I'll probably do it out here on the West Coast one of these days at Calvary. I just think it's a great piece. And my favorite movement is the one we're going to do. It happens to be the Dona Nobis Pacem. It's just a really beautiful setting of this text. It's so serene, so lovely. It's very Italianate, and actually makes me think of Mendelssohn a lot stylistically. So let's dive right into a little John Knowles Paine and the Dona Nobis Pacem. We're just going to listen to a few measures of the Agnus Dei leading us in before it starts. So here we go. Lovely. I'm sure you all were lovely. Yes, John Knowles Payne was the first full-time professor of music, listed, titled professor of music in higher education in America at Harvard. And he became the head of the entire music department at Harvard and had a long, distinguished career there. In fact, one of their halls is named Payne Hall. So anyway, it's lovely to visit that piece always. Now we are going to move on to a piece that a lot of you probably know. I bet a lot of you haven't sung it just because it's complicated. And trying to make this piece work, you need to have the right configuration of double choir and the right acoustic and the right organ. Usually it's most often done with organ, but I Was Glad of Perry. Sir Charles Hubert Hastings Perry. This was written in 1902 for the coronation of Edward VII. For a big occasion. And it's most often done with organ, but there is an orchestrated version, and we are going to sing along with that just because it is so much fun. And this version includes the vivat sections in the middle, the long live the king in this case, or queen, depending on who it was written for. And you often, if we sing this in church as an anthem, or in some other occasion, those are usually left out, but they're in this version and they're fun. So enjoy singing the vivats. The reason I picked this piece is just because it's a little different from everything else, but it also has a really beautiful section about praying for the peace of Jerusalem in the middle. Kind of the meat in the center of the piece is a prayer for peace. So it does go. It fits the theme, I promise, even if it doesn't seem like it. But let's just have fun with this one. The glorious I Was Glad of Perry. Here we go. I forgot to mention that arrangement was done for, I think, the Jubilee of Elizabeth. It includes like a brass band and a wind band and children's choirs and all sorts of things. It's fabulous. I hope you enjoyed that. Really over the top Edwardian splendor. Well, as they say, now for something completely different. A really old school, fantastic arrangement of the spiritual Deep River. That's a Robert Shaw arrangement. For copyright reasons, I couldn't put this one on the screen. And the only version that had it already published was a really terrible recording. So I just decided to play this original recording from the Robert Shaw Chorale. And a lot of you probably know this song sort of well enough to fake it and sing along. So, and if you just want to listen, that's good too. It's just really beautiful. I think the message of peace in this song is particularly resonant right now. We all want to cross over and be somewhere that is free of strife. So, Deep River, let's give it a listen. Sorry, went a little too far. Beautiful. All right, so we just have one little piece left. It's a hymn. And I decided to stay with the theme of river because there's something about images of rivers that ever-flowing stream that is so pervasive in folklore, in spiritual writing, in our liturgies, in rituals, in mythology. Rivers are always symbols of something you have to cross over to find peace, to get to the promised land, to get the ring, to save the kingdom, to do whatever these things are. A river is both sometimes an obstacle, but also a symbol of the permanence of life and the flowing of good things and peace. So I thought we would end with a great classic 19th century American hymn, Shall We Gather at the River. I have not necessarily the most wonderful recording ever, but it had the 2 verses that I wanted to do. You'll see the music on the screen, and we are just doing verse 1 and verse 4. Verse 1 and 4, going right through. They sing in unison for the verse. You feel free to sing in parts if you want. But here's Robert Lowry's Shall We Gather at the River. So that brings us to the end of the music. I wanted to share one little last thing with you all before we go. It's a poem that means a lot to me. I think it means a lot to some of you too, because of its context in our past together. I was the music director of the West Village Chorale when September 11th happened. And shortly, we were supposed to have a rehearsal that night. In fact, it would have been our first rehearsal of that season. And sometime after the events of September 11th, I wanted to write a piece that had something to do with that experience. And I was looking for poetry, and I found a poem that I loved very much and ended up setting to music. And we sang it on the 2nd anniversary of September 11th, the West Village Chorale. And I've done it a couple times since, including out here. And the poem is called Wage Peace. And I've since become friends on Facebook with the poet. Her name is Judith Hill. She lives in New Mexico. She's a wonderful poet, a well-known poet. When I first wrote the piece, it was misattributed to someone else, and then it was listed as anonymous. And years later, I finally figured out who actually wrote it. It's a beautiful poem, and I wanted to just read it now because it is such a wonderful prayer for peace. And the fact that she wrote it in response to the terrible things that happened that day, to me, makes it all the more powerful. And it has a lot of resonance for what we're going through in the world right now. So here is Wage Peace by Judith Hill. Wage peace with your breath. Breathe in firemen and rubble. Breathe out whole buildings and flocks of red-winged blackbirds. Breathe in terrorists and breathe out sleeping children and freshly mown fields. Breathe in confusion and breathe out maple trees. Breathe in the fallen and breathe out lifelong friendships intact. Wage peace with your listening. Hearing sirens, pray loud. Remember your tools, flower seeds, clothespins, clean rivers. Make soup, play music, memorize the words for thank you in 3 languages. Learn to knit and make a hat. Think of chaos as dancing raspberries. Imagine grief as the outbreath of beauty or the gesture of fish. Swim for the other side. Wage peace. Never has the world seemed so fresh and precious. Have a cup of tea and rejoice. Act as if armistice has already arrived. Celebrate today. Thank you all so much for spending this evening with me. I celebrate each of you and this opportunity to spend a little time making music together, even though we aren't in the same place. Much love to all of you.
Michael, this has been great. Thank you for leading us in an evening of peace and serenity. And thank you for being willing to come back and lead a virtual sing for us. It was a really special treat to be able to sing with you again. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, thank you. And to close out our summer season, thank you everyone for making this our most successful virtual Summer Sing series ever. Truly, we are so appreciative of each of our guest conductors for their informative lessons and for conducting to an invisible choir. And we're also appreciative of our amazing audience. Thank you for participating in our sings and for your support of the West Village Chorale. Whether you've been tuning in every week since the beginning of the summer or just experienced your first virtual sing tonight, we sincerely hope you leave feeling the connection to our choral family and community. And here's to hoping that next year we can all be in person together at Judson Memorial Church. Before we go, I do have one more person to thank, and that is our tech guru, our board member, Liam McNamara. Liam has been the wizard behind the curtain, making each of our summer sings run smoothly and without a hitch. So thank you, Liam, for making our sings possible. Well, folks, that's it for me. We hope you enjoyed your evening and consider making a donation to the West Village Chorale. Michael, thanks again for a wonderful sing. And good night, everyone. Thank you all so much.
Thanks for having me. Bye, everybody.